Hello, everyone, and welcome to Listening to Lancaster. I'm Diana Martin with Hourglass, and it's my pleasure to be joined today by local architect and Emlen Urban expert, Gregory Scott. Thanks so much for joining me. Gregg is a partner emeritus at RLPS Architects, and you've probably seen his column in Lancaster Newspapers, where he regularly writes about Lancaster's rich architecture. I'm sitting down with Gregg today because he has a very exciting project in the works. This fall, he'll be publishing the first ever hardcover book about Lancaster's most notable architect, Emlen Urban. That book, entitled Urban Legend, will highlight 25 of Urban's projects through beautiful photography and will bring to life all the architectural styles that Urban worked in, as well as the people behind the projects who commissioned them and help bring them to life. So before we jump into the book, Gregg, could you give us a little bit of background on Emlen Urban? I think probably most people in Lancaster have heard his name, and just would love to hear a little bit more about really who he was and what are some of the buildings that he designed that we would still recognize today.
Sure. Thanks, Diana. And this is a real treat and a real pleasure to have this conversation today. Emlen Urban, everyone asks, well, what's the C? The C stands for Cassius. And obviously Cassius Emlen Urban, but for whatever reason, he never ever used Cassius during his introductions or even in his signature. So it was interesting. It's always C in his own signature, C. Emlen. And when he would introduce himself to people, he would say, hello, my name is Emlen Urban. What's fascinating about that, when you research the word Cassius as a name, it's everything you don't really want to be associated with. It's one that references someone who is arrogant, sort of full of themselves, a little bit beyond their reach and whatnot. But when you look at the word Emlen, that's polar opposite. It's someone who is gentle, genuine, sincere. So maybe that's the reason he dropped Cassius and used Emlen. Anyway, he was born just to give you a context of history, he was born 5 months before the Battle of Gettysburg. And he was born in February of 1863. Gettysburg was, of course, July of 1863. He was born in a village called Conestoga Center in the southern part of the county. He was one of 5 children, the second born of a family of 5. In 1874, his family, when he was the age of 10, moved from Conestoga to South Queen Street. And the family of 7, including mom and dad, then were raised in a very, very modest 2.5-story brick home on South Queen Street. And Emlen then matriculated through the public school system of Lancaster and went through elementary, junior high school, and then ultimately the boys' high school. And he graduated in the year 1880. What's fascinating about that is Emlen really struggled with academics. And we discovered recently that he was tied for last place in his high school class academically. However, because of his strong magnetic personality, both the faculty and the students loved him. And so they agreed that he would actually represent them and do the valedictorian speech for his graduating class. So between the boys' high school and the girls' high school, there were about 34 students. And all the faculty and all the guests that listened to him deliver his valedictorian speech.
So how did he jump from that into architecture?
Well, I think his father was a carpenter and a very well-respected carpenter in the city. And his father started a planing mill called Urban Burger Planing Mill. Planing mills at that time made windows and doors and architectural moldings, wood shutters, anything wood related. And my belief is that as a young boy at 10, Emlen would spend a lot of time with his father in the planing mill. And I think that's where he was introduced the idea of architecture. Urban was Amos's first son and his eldest son, and they just had a really close, strong bond. So my belief is that's where he got his introduction into the love of buildings through his father. What's also interesting is, for some reason unknown, but we can do some conjecturing, is he elected not to go to a university to study and pursue architecture. At that time in 1880, there were very few schools of architecture in our country. So whether it was because his family was of little means, that he didn't have the financial resources to go to Pennsylvania, Philadelphia Academy of Architecture, I don't know. But he did elect to do an apprenticeship, and he started first in Scranton for 18 months and then moved to Philadelphia for the next 30 months. And after a short 4 years of apprenticeship, he came back to his hometown of Lancaster and, like what we call, hung his shingle, so to speak, and said, at 21, I'm ready to practice architecture in my hometown. So with that, we also discovered through newspaper stories, even at the age of 23, he had already designed over 120 buildings at the age of 23.
Wow.
Granted, most of them, or probably 90%, were residences. They weren't serious public buildings, but nevertheless, at the age of 23, that is one whale of an accomplishment.
What are some of the buildings that people would know and recognize today that are C. Emlen Urban?
Well, the most obvious ones, and the book certainly covers these because they're the ones that people recognize. So the Grice building, who doesn't know the skyscraper in our city that stood there for over 60 years before it had competition? But the Grice building, certainly Watt and Shand, which is now the Convention Center, the Hager building, which is on West King Street, the Stevens Girls High School out on Charlotte, the Fulton Elementary School, Reynolds Junior High School, Riley Brothers and Robb, just a few of those to mention. As you said in the introduction, the book is covering 25. And of those 25, we're covering 17 of his 21 styles of architecture, which is pretty amazing in itself.
It looks like he also did a range of residential, institutional, even religious buildings, educational buildings. Was that uncommon for the time, or
I
to
think,
work in so
yeah,
many styles and different types of buildings?
it was. And I think to that point, I always tell my audiences, whether it's a lecture or a walking tour, that I say Mr. Urban was versed in, prolific in 21 different languages. Because in the 1800s and the early 1900s, architects would practice and design their buildings in a particular architectural style. Some of them you might be familiar with. We often talk about Italian Renaissance or Tudor Revival or Art Deco or the Beaux-Arts. So in that period of time, there were 21 styles that he spoke and knew and had to understand, so that when he would design in that style, people would look at it and say, oh, that's English Gothic, or that's Tudor Revival. So you know what I'm saying, Diana? He had to understand the language that made it so. So in addition to that, he would wrap 45 to 54 different building types. And unless you're an architect, you really can't appreciate what that means. It means not only did he have to understand 21 languages, he had to understand the intricacies of building types. For instance, he knew how to design a hospital. He knew how to design a skyscraper. He knew how to design a YMCA. He knew how to design silk mills. He knew how to design armories, you name it, department stores, churches. So 54 different types of buildings. He had complete grasp of that.
You've been studying C. Emlen Urban for a while now. It goes way back before the book. I think maybe close to 20 years you've been following his story. What got you so interested in his life and wanting to learn more about him?
Well, I think certainly Lancaster Newspaper gave me the opportunity to write a monthly column for them all the way 22 years ago. I started. So every month for 22 years, I've been writing about architecture and design for our city. And I think it was October of 2017, I decided to start writing about the work of C. Emlen Urban. I just really wanted to focus on this amazing architect who I didn't know a whole lot about. So they gave me an opportunity to do the research while I was teaching our community about his work. So for 24 stories over 24 months, I wrote every month a different story about him and the projects that he did. That really got me interested in how amazing this architect was in our community, and also how different he was from any other architect that I know of in our history. So that in itself sort of got me cranked up. Then I started to focus on who was he as a person, not just the buildings, but what was the backstory on the building? What's the backstory on the Hager family? What's the backstory on Mr. William Walton Greist? What's the backstory on William Bousman? And when those started to come together, when I would begin to marry the building's architecture with the personality behind it, along with Urban's engagement, that's when I decided it's time to do the book. It was too good not to talk about.
And I think you were sharing with me in another conversation that you even found similarities between yourself and Urban,
Oh
which
my gosh.
probably which probably really made the story that much more interesting for you to follow.
Yeah, I'd say, Diana, that's when it started to get a little creepy. Creepy in a good way, not a scary way. But when I started to recognize and discover the parallels of our lives, I started to say, you know what? I think I was actually destined to write this book. And if you want to hear a few, I can give you a few.
Sure,
You want to hear a
let's
few?
hear a
Okay.
few.
Well, first and foremost, I was born exactly 10 years after he died. So he passed away in 1939. I died in about the same month. Uh, I was born in 1949. So we have that 10-year difference in our kind of lifespans. Obviously, we were both practicing architects, so that's the obvious parallel. But then it started to get a little bit more serious and interesting when I realized that C. Emlen Urban fell in love with and married his high school sweetheart. I did the same thing. I fell in love with my high school sweetheart, and we got married as young adults. I was in my 20s, as was Urban in his early 20s. But also, we had parallel names. His wife's name was Jenny, and my wife's name was Ginny. Depending where you were in the United States, people would call her Ginny or Jenny. So that was an interesting parallel. The other interesting parallel was that we both had only two children. We had a girl first and then a son second. So those were interesting parallels. And so you begin to wonder, why am I writing this book? There has to be a reason that our life stories are so intertwined that I think I was almost asked somehow to bring his story to light. And so we just go on through all of these parallels, and I talk about it in the book, and I'll certainly talk about it in the public lectures that I do in the future.
When you started the project, if I saw somewhere written that when you started, you had a list of 94 documented urban commissions.
Yeah.
Well, since you
Yes.
started researching that's grown to over 700 commissions that you've discovered that were done by C. Emlen Urban. So, what are some of the things that you've been learning and uncovering as you've been broadening your knowledge and really the community's knowledge around his work?
Yeah. Well, that I think was the showstopper for me when I started the serious research in 2018. There were only two sort of paper periodicals put out about him and his work, and they were both produced by the Preservation Trust. And in there, I used that as sort of my chassis to start my search. And as you mentioned, there were 94 listed in that research that he did. So that's where I started. I started investigating those 94. Shortly after I started that investigation, Lancaster Newspapers unveiled and opened their vaults, so to speak, so that all of their newspapers from the 1700s up to today were released and made available to the general public. And because of that, we were able to do word queries and word search electronically that would allow us to type in the word see Emlen Urban and different cues. And we would begin to start this avalanche of information. And when I say we, I mean this book, this research would not happen without my dear friend, Deb Osh. Deb Osh is my research historian who is well-versed in how to do the research. So she basically just keeps waterfalling and avalanching me with more information than I can possibly absorb. So in a very short order, we went from 94 commissions to well over 750 commissions. What we learned through all of that research is he was able to do this work with a very lean staff of 5 architects and himself. That to me, Diana, is incomprehensible. How you can produce that much work with such a small office. But so far, that's all we've uncovered is a staff of 5 architects, very talented, probably as talented as Urban, but of course, because his name was there, he was the one that received all the notoriety. And, through that, I think what I discovered most recently in our avalanche of information is how much normal, quote, ordinary work he did. Yes, we know about all the big high watermark projects, but he did over 400 residences in our community and in Hershey. So when you walk down any of our streets in Lancaster and you move from the core out into the suburbs of about 5 blocks in any direction, you're looking at Urban's work. So many of the row homes in our city are his work, and we just discovered that very recently.
That's fascinating. Maybe at sometime in the future we'll have plaques on each one of them appreciating
Wouldn't that be awesome?
all
We
the work
really
that he's
should.
done in Lancaster. So earlier this year, Hourglass, we hosted a forum with Lancaster history about the new museum that's going to be coming downtown for Thaddeus Stevens and Lydia Hamilton Smith. Now, see, Emlen Urban is getting his first hardcover book.
Yeah.
It seems to me that maybe some of these our community's overlooked historical figures are getting a newfound appreciation and recognition. I'm curious if you've seen that or what you attribute that to. You've been involved with historic preservation efforts in Lancaster for many years now. Have you seen a shift in kind of how our community is thinking about historic preservation?
I really have. I've seen a big shift. But before we get into the shift, what was curious to me is why now? Why Urban now? And why was he sort of forgotten? Not totally forgotten. I mean, his name's been knocked around off and on over the decades, but what happened? So when you think about, and I think what makes sense, Diana, is he passed away in May of 1939. So obviously that was when you think about it, that was the very, very beginning of World War II. 1939 is really when it started to unravel as a world, issue to deal with. And so he passed away the year the war started. And that took us through basically 6 years of focus on world wars and trying to discover peace and harmony. And so from 1939 to 1945, 1946, we were distracted, not only as a city, but as a community. So, part of that, I think, is the reason he was just sort of forgotten. He did all those great things, but sort of forgotten. So then in 1946, 1947, now you start the new wave of the baby boomers. Another huge focus of trying to rebuild our country, rebuild our economy, and he got lost again. And then the next thing that happened is the 1960s. And that's really when it got dicey. The 1960s for our country was certainly a great decade of turmoil, disruption. That's when our own city of Lancaster got caught up in the disastrous urban renewal. And that's when we lost in 18 months, we decimated 925 buildings in 18 months in the core of our city. And within that 925, there were probably about 20 or so Emlen Urban buildings that were taken down. Some were incredibly notable, like the Brunswick Hotel, his nationally acclaimed YMCA, and so forth. But they were all taken down, unfortunately. And then we started this sort of renewal or this rebirth in appreciation of history. And that really started in the 1990s. It took that long to begin to recognize how important our history is in our community. And it was at that time when I began to focus on what's going on in our community, look at the amazing architecture that we have left. And that's when I started my column, as I said, 22 years ago, and just started celebrating Lancaster. And through that readership, I was always receiving comments and thank yous from the readers. And then I started doing lectures around the county. And I think that started this sort of awareness and momentum and appreciation for our city's architecture. And it has just snowballed, and it's just gotten this incredible momentum. And whenever I do walking tours, they're sellouts. Whenever I do lectures, they're packed. And it's because people are proud of their community. They're proud of where they live. And so for the first time, they'll be able to hold in their hands a hardbound book celebrating not just Emlen Urban, but our community and our city and our history. It's been a long journey, Diana, but it's been a good one.
Tell us a little bit more about the book. I know you've been working with a local team on the photography, the design, the printing. What's that experience been like?
That has far, far, far exceeded any of my wildest expectations of what it could be. I think what I ended up doing when I got serious about writing it, because the pressure was getting too heavy. I was just tired of making up excuses, oh, it's going to be next year. It's going to be next year. So I said, well, the only way it's going to get done is if I sequester myself up in Maine. And that's where I am right now. So I came up here at our home in Maine this past January. And I lived here essentially alone from January, February, March, April, and May. And that's when I produced the book. That's when I wrote the stories, pulled all the research together, worked with Deb Osh in basically knitting this kind of legacy, this story together from his earliest childhood and work through his end of life. And so that gave me true focus. At the same time I was writing, my photographer, Matthew Tennyson, who's local, and I have been working together for 3 years, accumulating photography. Architectural photography isn't like, you and I might do on our iPhones, where we go snap a picture here and there that feels good. Architectural photography is an art form in itself, and it's all dependent on daylight, time of day, time of season, foliage, no foliage. It's a very complicated science. So it took Matthew Tennyson a good 3 years to begin developing and providing enough, I'll call it fodder, because I said, Matthew, you can never take too many photos, because when you develop a book, it's like a movie. There's a lot of stuff that ends up on the floor that the public never sees. So we worked together for over 3 years doing the photography together. Then I did the writing. And so then the third leg of the stool was who's going to actually publish, who's going to edit, who's going to art direct, who's going to do that heavy lifting. And we were very fortunate to have Fig Industries accept our invitation to join our team. So now we have, everything is local. So I'm local, Matthew Tennyson is local, and Fig Industries is local. Everything about the book, and we're proud to say, is homegrown, right out of our own soil. Even the book is being printed locally. It's not being printed in China or Canada or wherever many publishers go outside their hometowns, but we made an absolute commitment. This book is 100% Lancaster County.
And how can people pre-order a copy?
It's very easy. You just Google or Safari, whatever your search engine is, egg and dart. That's just like the egg you eat, AND, and dart, like you throw at a dartboard. Egg and dart books, plural.com. Egganddartbooks.com will take you directly to the pre-order site. And a lot of people go, what's the egg and the dart? Well, egg and dart is actually goes back to ancient Greece and Rome, and that's one of the earliest what we call decorative forms of architecture. It's decorative, it's not structural. And it's this egg and dart is a series of literally what looks like eggs interrupted with a arrow, we call it a dart, then an egg, then an arrow, then an egg, and an arrow, and an egg, and an arrow. So when you Google egg and dart books, you will see the logo of egg and darts. So it's a lot of fun. We've had a blast doing this. It's been a lot of work, I'll tell you that. More work than I expected. I thought I was finished when I wrote it. That was only the beginning.
And if you pre-order a copy, there's actually the books are discounted if you order them
Yes. The
now. And
secret,
I was gonna say you have a launch party, right? If people,
yes. So this is what everyone wants to do. Now, my team might not be happy because it's a heavy discount if you pre-order the book before November 14th. So what are we? We're almost how many months? November? 2 months? What are we? 2 months out?
yep,
I
we're
don't.
2 months out.
2 months out. So you've got basically 8 weeks to receive a $25 discount on the book and the invitation to the launch party. So you must do that. We'll call it the appreciation party. So with your pre-order comes the invitation to the appreciation party, which will be hosted at the Southern Market. That will be the first time people actually hold the book in their hands. Every book is being presented in a custom designed box that will protect your precious book from any damage. And it is an amazing book design for the protection of the book. And so at the appreciation party, there'll be an event cocktail or drink for everyone if they if they're interested. There'll be obviously conversations and thank yous, and there's going to be refreshments. It's going to be a blast. So far, the momentum and the interest is so heavy for this that we might have to do 2 separate events in 2-hour time slots. So the interest has far exceeded our expectation, but we are over the moon, happy with excitement.
And do you have plans to write another book after this one?
Diana, what do you think? Obviously, yes. Fig Industries doesn't want to hear it because they want me to focus on this book and making sure, this is successfully marketed and so forth. But yes, I'll tell you the title of the next book. One of the things that I guess I know and my wife knows, and maybe a few people know, is that Terry and I had the great fortune of meeting and befriending C. Emlen Urban's great granddaughters.
Wow.
Miriam and Alexa. So Miriam and Alexa were my age. They were born in the 40s, very early 1950s. They never knew their great grandfather, but they know the stories about him. And they told Terry and me that C. Emlen's name within the family unit was Baba, B-A-B-A. So instead of my grandkids call me Poppy, so his children would call him Baba. And so I'm telling you that because it works its way into the title of the next book. So the book is going to be this life story of C. Emlen Urban and his relationship with Milton S. Hershey, who also has Lancaster roots. So Milton Hershey and C. Emlen Urban were very good friends, lifelong friends. They did all the architecture together. They did the town planning together. So Mr. Hershey's nickname in our country was the Chocolate King. So the book's title is Baba and the Chocolate King.
I love that. I think, yeah, a lot of people don't know Hershey almost could be a sister city to Lancaster with all the buildings that
Absolutely.
he designed in both towns.
Yep. So in that book, our readers will understand why Mr. Hershey left Lancaster. He was hugely successful in Lancaster, but he decided, nope, Lancaster's not for me. I'm leaving. But he took his architect with him to Hershey.
Well, I am very excited for the first book coming out this fall, and I'm very excited for the next book coming down the line. Before we close, I'm going to put you on the spot. What's one thing that you wish that everyone in Lancaster knew about C. Emlen Urban?
I wish we could all meet him in person. I've met him many times through my discoveries and through my dreams and through my imaginations. What I would say about Mr. Urban, because I do compare him to other architects that I know that worked in Lancaster, I would say that he was a kind and generous individual, very kind to his family. Now, he was a workaholic. I'm not sure he ever slept, but he was a very kind and gentle and very professional person. He always dressed properly. He was always appropriate in his conversations with newspaper reporters. And for that, I thank him because he held our profession at the level that it needs to be held at.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. As Gregg mentioned, you can pre-order copies of Urban Legend at egganddartbooks.com. They're currently on sale. If you order by November 14th, you'll be invited to a book launch party. I hope to see you all there. And thanks so much, everyone, for listening. You can find more episodes of Listening to Lancaster on our YouTube channel and on our website at hourglasslancaster.org. So thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.